So today, something happened that could change the balance of global power overnight. China has issued a direct warning to Donald Trump over the possible blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And the message was chillingly simple. Touch our energy lifeline and we will respond. Those words are not diplomacy. They are not negotiation. They are a threat from one nuclear power to another. And if this warning is ignored, the world could be pushed into a conflict far bigger than Iran, far bigger than the Gulf itself. Because this is no longer just about oil routes or tanker ships. This is about whether the United States can still control the world alone, or whether China is ready to challenge that power directly. And here's why China is speaking now. For decades, China avoided open confrontation with America. It focused on growing rich, building strength quietly, and staying patient. But now, China believes it has no choice. Nearly 40% of China's imported energy comes from the Persian Gulf, and much of it passes through the Strait of Hormuz. If that route is blocked, China doesn't just lose oil, its factories slow down, transportation suffers, food production is threatened, and the economy faces severe shock. So Beijing is making one thing clear. It will not allow decisions made in Washington to strangle China's survival. Now let me explain what "if you touch" really means, because this is not vague diplomatic language. This is a warning with real consequences. China is telling the United States that if American actions keep the Strait of Hormuz closed or continue blocking energy flows to China, then Beijing will act to defend its interests. But China is not saying exactly how, and that silence is intentional. Ambiguity gives them maximum leverage. It keeps Washington guessing. So what are China's real options? First, economic retaliation. China could restrict exports of rare earth minerals used by American tech companies. It could reduce access for US businesses to Chinese markets. It could pressure supply chains that American manufacturers depend on. These moves would hurt both sides, so it may not be China's first choice, but it remains a powerful weapon. Second, military support for Iran. China could provide weapon systems, intelligence, satellite support, or diplomatic cover at the United Nations. This would raise the cost of any US military campaign without putting Chinese troops directly into battle. It is safer and likely the most realistic short-term option. Third, direct military intervention. China could send naval forces into the Gulf, escort Chinese tankers, or establish a presence that challenges any blockade. This would be the most dangerous path, because one mistake could trigger direct confrontation between two nuclear powers. So would China really risk conflict with America over energy security? Strategic logic suggests yes. Not because China wants war, but because dependence on another nation for economic survival is something Beijing sees as unacceptable. From China's perspective, allowing another power to decide whether its economy functions would mean accepting permanent weakness. And China has spent decades building power to avoid exactly that future. In 1941, the United States imposed an oil embargo on Japan. At the time, Japan depended heavily on imported oil. The embargo created a crisis. Accept American pressure and lose strategic freedom, or fight to secure alternative energy sources. Japan chose war, launching the attack on Pearl Harbor and expanding into Southeast Asia. This was not random madness. It was the logic of a nation facing what it saw as an existential economic threat. Now, I am not saying China will repeat Japan's actions. The world is different. The weapons are different. The consequences are far greater. But the core principle remains the same. When a major power believes another nation can choke off its economic survival, military options move onto the table. And that is why China's warning matters so much. China relies on energy routes passing through the Strait of Hormuz. If that flow is disrupted for too long, Beijing faces a strategic nightmare: accept severe economic damage or act to secure its lifeline. China is now signaling that if disruption continues, action may follow. This changes everything about the conflict between the United States and Iran. Washington may have believed it could pressure Iran alone, closing shipping routes, striking targets, tightening sanctions, and expecting no major power to interfere. But China has challenged that assumption. Beijing is effectively saying, if your conflict with Iran threatens our energy security, we will respond. We may support Iran. We may raise your costs. We may defend our own interests directly. That transforms a regional confrontation into the possibility of a much larger power struggle between America and China. And that creates a new level of danger, because now Washington must calculate not only the cost of confronting Iran, but the cost of managing simultaneous tension with the world's second largest power. Follow this channel, because what we are witnessing could be one of the most important shifts in global power dynamics in decades. The era of uncontested unilateral action may be fading, and the warning over Hormuz could be remembered as the moment the world changed. If China decides to move beyond words, several scenarios could unfold, and each one raises the stakes dramatically. Scenario 1, China increases support for Iran. That could mean advanced air defense systems, anti-ship missiles, electronic warfare tools, and satellite intelligence. It may not end the conflict, but it would make any US military campaign far more costly. American pilots could face stronger defenses. Naval forces could encounter more advanced threats. Operations could be disrupted by jamming and cyber interference. The cost in time, money, and lives would rise sharply. Scenario 2. China deploys naval forces to the Gulf. Chinese warships could escort tankers carrying oil to China and declare interference unacceptable. That would place Chinese and American forces in dangerous proximity during an active crisis. One mistake, one radar misread, one aggressive commander, and suddenly, two nuclear powers could be exchanging fire. Once that starts, escalation becomes unpredictable. Scenario 3. China builds alternative supply routes. Beijing could accelerate pipelines from Russia and Central Asia, expand overland energy corridors, and reduce dependence on the Strait of Hormuz entirely. This avoids direct war, but creates a permanent strategic shift. It would weaken the Gulf's leverage, reduce American influence over energy choke points, and make China harder to pressure in future conflicts. Now let's talk economics, because this warning is not only military, it is about control of the global system. For decades, the United States benefited from military dominance in the Gulf and influence over key sea lanes. That gave Washington enormous leverage. Countries dependent on imported energy often had to consider American policy because disruptions could be devastating. This strengthened sanctions power, financial influence, and America's role in shaping trade rules. But if China is now willing to challenge that system directly, the equation changes. Beijing is effectively saying, energy can no longer be used as a weapon against us. And if China backs those words with action, it could mark the beginning of a new global balance of power, where no single nation controls the world's economic lifelines alone. And if China successfully proves it can protect its energy supplies even against American opposition, the consequences go far beyond the Persian Gulf. Because every major power would draw the same conclusion. American control over global energy routes is no longer absolute. India would pursue stronger independent supply corridors. Japan would deepen its own energy security strategy. Europe would diversify faster to avoid dependence on any single route vulnerable to geopolitical pressure. That would weaken one of the foundations of American global influence, the ability to dominate key choke points and shape the behavior of energy-dependent nations. Now let me address the biggest question. Could this really lead to war between America and China? Could two nuclear powers clash over oil tankers in the Gulf? The honest answer is, it could. Not because either side wants war, but because both sides see certain interests as non-negotiable. The United States sees strategic military dominance and control of critical sea lanes as central to its global power. China sees energy security and economic survival as essential to national stability. When two great powers believe their core interests cannot be compromised, conflict becomes possible. Not inevitable, but possible. And the danger grows the longer this crisis continues. Every day of prolonged disruption increases pressure on China to act. Every day America insists only its interests define the rules of the Gulf increases the chance of a harder Chinese response. This is what strategists call a security dilemma. Both sides take actions they believe are defensive, while the other side sees those same actions as threatening. History shows that security dilemmas have triggered wars that neither side originally wanted, but both felt forced into. Now, here is what China's warning truly reveals. This is not only about oil, it is about the global order itself. For roughly 3 decades after the Cold War, the United States stood as the dominant superpower. American military reach was unmatched. American preferences shaped many international rules. The United States dollar dominated world trade. But China's message suggests something larger. The era of a fully unipolar world may be ending. For years, many nations, even powerful ones like China, accepted a system largely shaped by the United States because challenging it seemed too costly and too dangerous. But China's warning over the Strait of Hormuz signals something new. Beijing is effectively saying that era is ending. We are now strong enough to challenge unilateral pressure. We are willing to accept risks to defend our interests. We will not allow our economy to depend entirely on decisions made elsewhere. This is not necessarily China trying to replace American dominance with Chinese dominance. It is China demanding a multipolar world, a system where several major powers hold influence and no single nation can act alone without considering the interests of others. And if China proves it can successfully resist American pressure, the ripple effects could be global. Russia could feel emboldened to push harder in Europe and Central Asia. India could assert itself more strongly across South Asia. Regional powers everywhere may pursue more independent policies with less concern for Washington's preferences. That would create a world more competitive, less predictable, and more prone to friction between rival powers. Now let's talk about what this means for ordinary people. If you are in the United States, your government could face a difficult choice not seen since the Cold War. Option 1, reduce confrontation and accept a smaller share of global influence. Option 2, escalate confrontation and accept the risks of a great power crisis. Neither path is painless. Both could reshape American power, markets, and living standards. Your job prospects, savings, borrowing costs, and economic security could all be affected by how this rivalry is managed. If escalation goes badly, the risks include recession, market shocks, military tensions, and wider instability. If America gradually steps back, it could mean a slower decline in financial advantages that came from global dominance. If you are in China, your government is also taking major risks, because challenging an established superpower always carries serious economic and strategic consequences. China may be willing to confront the United States to protect its energy security, but that path carries enormous danger. If the confrontation spirals, China could face severe economic retaliation. Trade disruptions could damage growth. Decades of prosperity built over 40 years could be placed at risk. A strategy meant to secure China's future could instead threaten it. If you are in Europe or Japan, the dilemma is different. You would be watching your 2 most important economic partners move toward deeper confrontation. Support America and risk reduced access to Chinese markets. Support China and risk weakening American security guarantees. Either choice could hurt both economic stability and national security. If you are in the developing world, the burden could be even heavier. Great power rivalry often harms those with the least influence over it. Global trade could slow. Energy prices could remain high. Food costs could rise. Foreign investment and development aid could decline as wealthier nations focus inward. Many countries would face consequences created by powers far larger than themselves. Now let's examine what options Donald Trump could have in response to China's warning. Option 1, ignore the warning and continue current policy. This means accepting that China may respond indirectly or directly. US forces could face Chinese-supported systems. naval encounters could become more dangerous. The risk of miscalculation rises sharply. But stepping back could be portrayed domestically as weakness. Option 2, negotiate with China. Washington could seek an arrangement where shipping routes reopen, China's energy concerns are addressed, and American strategic goals are partially preserved. This would require compromise and recognition that China has interests that must be considered. It may be rational, but politically difficult. Option 3, escalate pressure. Increase military deployments. Expand economic pressure. Signal that American policy will not be constrained by Chinese warnings. This is the most dangerous path because it raises the chance of direct confrontation between great powers. My assessment is that an initial response could lean toward tougher rhetoric and increased pressure. But over time, strategic realities often force adjustment, because in conflicts like this, power alone rarely determines the final outcome. The cost of prolonged confrontation with China could become extremely high. Allies may push for compromise. Businesses may demand protection of trade ties. Military planners could warn against the dangers of simultaneous crises. Because of that, a negotiated arrangement may eventually emerge. But if it does, it could mark a major shift in global power. The United States would, in effect, be acknowledging that it cannot manage the Strait of Hormuz without considering Chinese interests. Once that precedent is set, America's global dominance will be fundamentally weakened. Let's bring this together. China's message is simple. If our energy lifeline is threatened, we will respond. This is more than diplomatic theater. It is strategic signaling backed by real stakes. China appears willing to accept serious risk to protect its energy security. That transforms any conflict involving Iran from a regional dispute into a potential great power confrontation. It suggests the unipolar era may be fading, while multipolar competition grows stronger. It challenges parts of the economic system that supported decades of American influence. And it forces everyone, Americans, Chinese citizens, allies, rivals, and ordinary people everywhere, to prepare for a more uncertain world. The Strait of Hormuz is not just about oil tankers. It is about whether one nation can still unilaterally control a critical global choke point. China's answer appears to be no. And that rejection could reshape international politics for years to come. The real question is not whether anyone welcomes this change. The real question is whether people understand it and are prepared for it. Because the transition may already be underway. The era of cheap energy depended partly on secure Gulf flows. Those flows are now contested. The global role of the United States dollar has long been tied to energy trade and financial trust, while alternative systems continue to develop. Security arrangements built around American enforcement are being tested in new ways. If China succeeds in forcing accommodation of its interests, the international system could move further toward multipolar rivalry rather than singular dominance. And that world would likely be more complex, more competitive, more dangerous, and far less predictable than the one many have known since the Cold War ended. Understanding that shift, preparing for it, and adapting to it may become essential for governments, businesses, and individuals alike. Tell me in the comments, do you think China is bluffing? Would Beijing truly risk confrontation with America over Hormuz? Or will this warning force Washington to change course? Because the answer to that question may help shape the next global era. Subscribe for continued analysis as this story develops. I'll see you next time.